What if everything we've been told about autoimmunity is wrong? I'm Elizabeth Yarnell. After awakening partially blind one morning in 1999, a doctor told me my multiple sclerosis would put me in a wheelchair within 10 years. I refused to accept that as the end of the story, so I started investigating. Welcome to the Inflammation Investigator, the podcast that uncovers the inflammation lurking underneath your ailments. Because autoimmune and chronic conditions should not be viewed as death knells when they are actually alarm bells. I'm a traditional naturopath and founder of the Inflammation Academy. And in 2 episodes every week, we dig into what conventional medicine might be missing. If you're living with chronic or unexplained symptoms, this investigation is for you. Your body has been trying to tell you something. Let's start listening.
In this episode, we're going to talk about food and chemical sensitivity testing so that you have some resources to find out exactly what's going on in your body without going through a ton of fruitless trial and error. Don't forget, I will be reading. For many autoimmune sufferers, accurate testing is key for designing a personal anti-inflammatory diet and lifestyle. Type 1 hypersensitivity reactions of anaphylaxis or hives that occur rapidly after ingestion of an offending food such as peanuts or shellfish can be fairly easy to recognize and then simply avoid. Less violent or delayed reactions may be more challenging to correlate to a triggering food or isolated ingredient. In the days before there were effective tests for type 4 hypersensitivity reactions, it could be incredibly challenging to suss out a potential food or chemical as the culprit behind mysterious symptoms. Historically, practitioners would advocate a low-tech elimination diet along the lines of eating only pears, rice, and chicken for 2 to 4 weeks to calm the immune system before reintroducing any randomly desired and potentially reactive food and assessing for a reaction. Unfortunately, this approach is of limited utility, as many people may be sensitive to pears or rice or even chicken to begin with, and therefore never experience a cessation of symptoms from this practice. Not to even mention the excruciating boredom of living on such a radically restricted diet and the overwhelming disappointment from wasted effort when it doesn't work to eliminate symptoms. The worst result to come out of this attempt comes when the person throws up their hands and concludes that changing their diet must not be part of their personal solution, when the truth is always just the opposite. What you eat always affects how your body feels and functions. Rather than shooting arrows in the dark and hoping to hit your personal inflammatory foods, valid food sensitivity testing can provide a clear roadmap to follow. Unfortunately, not all sensitivity, intolerance, and allergy tests are equally trustworthy or useful for our goal of designing an anti-inflammatory diet and lifestyle. So let's look at the types of tests out there. As I have mentioned, I am a certified LEAP therapist, CLT, which means I am trained in designing anti-inflammatory diets specifically to avoid food sensitivity reactions that trigger inflammation. The Mediator Release Test, known as the MRT, is truly the gold standard in food sensitivity testing and is predicated on scientific analysis and cytometry, the counting of cells. As of this writing, the test assesses more than 170 foods and chemicals that are in our food supply to determine how many inflammatory mediators, such as cytokines and histamine, are released by our white blood cells, thus measuring how reactive we may be to a substance. We know that when we have a bee sting or a poison ivy encounter, we might find some relief from taking an over-the-counter antihistamine medication such as Benadryl, but there are more than 80 mediators beyond histamine, such as prostaglandins and glycoproteins, that the blood cells can release upon exposure to what they deem to be a threat. Releasing the mediators initiates the inflammatory sequence, and inflammation travels along the bloodstream to become systemic. For example, while one may be diagnosed with inflammation in your thyroid, thyroiditis, or pancreas, pancreatitis, or the entire gastric cavity, gastritis, there will also be inflammation in the brain, muscles, and digestive tract because the bloodstream carries mediators throughout the body. The certification course from Oxford Biotechnology that I took to become a food sensitivity LEAP therapist covers all of this specific science and also makes clear that most other commonly used food sensitivity tests, whether they are offered at a doctor's office or ordered yourself online, are looking for IgG or IgE antibodies in the blood to indicate hypersensitivity or allergic reactions to specific foods. My issue with these tests is foundational because the presence of antibodies should mean that you are protected from that item, not that you need to avoid it. It is a fundamental flaw that makes these types of test results almost useless for targeting triggers of inflammation. Let's think about this focus on antibodies from a different vantage. Our world recently experienced a global respiratory virus characterized by the risk of lethal amounts of inflammation in the lungs. There was a mad rush to create a vaccine that would provide the antibodies needed to disarm the virus before it could do harm. Antibodies are made to protect us from threats. Applying this type of logic to food sensitivity testing, finding an antibody in my blood to mango, for example, should mean it would be safe for me to eat a mango. I already have the antibody needed to disarm the mango, right? But that is not how these other food sensitivity tests are interpreted and applied. Rather, the patient is advised to avoid the items that incited antibodies. Additionally, IgE and IgG antibodies are notoriously unreliable. Sometimes they show up and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they correlate to symptoms and sometimes they don't, particularly when it comes to type 4 cell-mediated immune reactions. This is why it's more effective to look at mediators rather than antibodies, since the presence of mediators always indicates inflammatory activity, whereas the presence of IgG or IgE antibodies may or may not align with how you are feeling. Therefore, when I receive the results from one of my clients' Mediator Release Tests, we are presented with not only a list of the most inflammatory foods and chemicals, but more importantly, in terms of practical usefulness, the MRT identifies the least inflammatory foods as well. In other words, rather than simply eliminating the most reactive ingredients and items and assuming that it's okay to eat anything else, secret, it's not, together we designed an oligo-antigenic diet, a way of eating that's focused on the safest and least inflammatory foods for that particular person. Not for a percentage of the population or for others with similar issues or for people who have had success with, but for that specific person. Relying on scientific data to build a customized anti-inflammatory eating plan tailored to you means there's no guesswork involved. This is a game changer for those who may have found some relief from removing common triggers from their diet, such as gluten and dairy, but nevertheless continue to experience symptoms. The scientifically designed and validated LEAP dietary therapy applies the MRT results effectively and efficiently in order to move inflammation out of the body as quickly as possible while avoiding adding new inflammation. It works. It can be disheartening to go through all the trouble of significantly changing your diet and see no signs of improvement, or to try to follow the dietary advice from multiple sources with blanket guidelines for the general public that may or may not be right for you. If you've been to all the doctors, tried all the drugs, and perhaps even gone gluten-free or paleo or sugar-free or fat-free or vegan or any of the other generalized diet plans in a quest to improve your health but are still struggling, then this may be a sign that you haven't yet found the right dietary path for you. The MRT can change that. As my client Justin said, getting restrictive actually expanded my diet. I had limited myself to so few foods that I thought I could eat, and now I have so many more flavors and textures to enjoy. The difference in how I feel is noticeable too. Be sure to tune in to the next episode when I will share another case study with food sensitivities and targeted dietary changes. Until then.
And that's another case filed on the Inflammation Investigator. Remember, every symptom is your body's way of communicating. We just need to learn the language. If today's episode sparked something for you, I want to hear about it. Share your own investigation discoveries with me on social media at Elizabeth Yarnell, or find me at elizabethyarnell.com. Your experience could be exactly what another listener needs to hear. And make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And here's the thing about investigations. They work best when you're not going it alone. If this podcast is helping you uncover the answers you've been searching for, please like, rate, subscribe, and review, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. As a new podcast, these actions mean more than you know. Want to dive deeper into your own inflammation investigation? Head over to inflammationinvestigator.com, where you can take my free inflammation quiz to uncover which hidden triggers might be affecting your health. Until next time, this is Elizabeth Yarnell, your inflammation investigator, reminding you that the solutions to your health issues are out there. Let's find them together.